To what extent do you think that what is being taught today in terms of Buddhist practices, and I know there are a whole lot of different flavors in different parts of the world, corresponds to what the Buddha was actually teaching? Does anybody have, I mean, I guess we don't really know what he was actually teaching, do we, in terms of a practice? Or do you have a pretty good idea and you feel that what you're doing conforms to that?
That's pretty tricky. We don't have solid written records where we can, with confidence, know how the Buddha taught exactly. Mm-hmm. We have some general sort of principles. In general, it's thought that what we find in the Pali literature is closest to what the Buddha taught. But that doesn't mean it's exactly what he taught.
Yeah.
And we know that what we find in the later Mahayana may represent important extensions of what the Buddha taught, but is less like what he taught. Doesn't mean it doesn't bring you to liberation. It just means it has features that objective scholars don't think were present in early Buddhism. And then the next step after that, Vajrayana, seems to be in some ways the most divergent from what the Buddha taught. Once again, it doesn't mean that it doesn't bring liberation, because there's such a thing as evolution. New things are discovered. These things that we find in Mahayana that we don't find in Hinayana, the small vehicle, or the Pali canon, and the things we find in Vajrayana that we don't find in Mahayana, some of them may be improvements and some of them may be the opposite of improvements. But in terms of general picture, there's sort of a big picture view is of what I just shared. What I just said is shared by most objective scholars of Buddhist history. But the criterion is not, we need to teach just what the Buddha taught, because we would need to dialogue with the Buddha to really understand what he taught.
Yeah.
And we can't do that. So I think we can, so I think that's what I have to say about that. I will say this, in terms of, well, you asked me about my teaching. Now, I am sure that there are a gazillion things about the way that I teach and go about things that would pretty much horrify the Buddha. But that's because he's a person of 2,500 years ago in a very different world. It's, it would take him a while to get used to our world. Okay. There's that. But I will say this. There's one central discovery that he made that I don't think gets emphasized enough in practice, in any of the three vehicles, actually. And it's the divide and conquer, the fact that you can untangle the sensory strands of self and the somethingness goes away. Now, I'm very aware that all of the Buddhist traditions talk about this. I'm not saying that. They absolutely talk about it. But what I'm saying is, for me, that's the centerpiece of practice. That's it. That's basically what I teach people. I don't use the 5 skandha model because that's too ambiguous and inaccessible to a beginner. But I use something like that. So the 5 skandha model essentially says there are these 5 components. If you untangle them and break the grasping around them, the somethingness of self goes away. So I offer an alternate taxonomy, but it's still the same basic principle. You have mental image, you have mental talk, you have physical and emotional body sensations. If you can untangle that and break the congealing and grasping around it, the somethingness of self goes away. And when the somethingness of self goes away, that's your initial liberation experience. Now, I make that the centerpiece of my teaching. That's and sometimes that sort of gets lost in the way people teach. So if I were to say, you asked me specifically how I see my relationship to the Buddha, I would say I take that seriously, and I really emphasize it, and my techniques are built primarily around that. Okay. Culturally, though, and in a lot of other ways, I'm sure that the Buddha would have a lot of difficulty adjusting to